Hello, all of you. Welcome to this edition, special edition, the last of the Satanic Adventures of Hod Dibben edition of NEWSHOUND. Hi, people. We're on the last of the series of four-part Hod Dibben articles. I've put them all up separately now so you can enjoy them in all of their glory. And this one I covered in Hod Dibben, or Black Hand number 3, The Devil Himself, which is about Hod Dibben, of course, and really is a good introduction to the wonderful world of Hod Dibben, the weird and wonderful world of the Pygmalion man, the man who would create Pygmalion girls wherever he went. He was a very strange and weird, possibly pedophilic. Don't know. It's hard to work out what he was. He wasn't a normal person. Anyway, this is the fourth part of the Satanic Adventures, Hod Dibben Satanic Adventures, and this is the fourth part of his series of articles he published in September People newspaper, and I think it was 1961. And the first three we've read out. Of course, it started off when he's serving in the RAF in the village of Twat in the Orkney Isles, Twat with 3 T's. And then he joins the black magic cult, regrets it, tries to escape it, has problems escaping it, gets signs and warnings, then stays at a light, scary manor where there's ghosts and there's hauntings, and his son's there. And oh my God, I had so much fun with the last one. And yeah, there is more Hod Dibben plans for the future. And I will say, ooh, I'm blurry. Ooh, ha! Like Hod Dibben out of the coast, out of the darkness comes Hod. I do have other plans for Hod too, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. For the time being, I'm going to share my screen, and I should already have a lined up. I don't think you can see the actual zoom when I'm sharing screen. So here you go. Let's come down here a bit so you can see it. And this is it. I've put it in 2 separate windows. So that's how they always come separate pages in these archives. But this is how it would have looked when you opened up the Mirror newspaper, or the People newspaper, which was an edition, Sunday edition of the Mirror. Eventually it'd be Sunday Mirror. Before it was the Sunday Mirror. For a while it was the People newspaper. They rebrand when they've said too much bad stuff about someone and they need to avoid liability for things they've said in the past. And I think that's why newspapers rebrand, most companies rebrand, and etc., etc., etc. And so this should be fun. I'm going to have to put on my glasses, my shiny little glasses. My shiny little glasses. And this is called I Cursed This Man, and He Fell Dead. In the whole tortured life of this slave of Satan, this was the most horrifying moment of all. And of course, I'm reading this out because this gives you a good idea of satanic panic, where it came from, how it was seeded into the environment, and the news as being something which is true. Even though that it was just stories told by nutty old leather-clad bum-chafing Hod Dibbens, it doesn't matter. This was seen as something real. So here we go. Let's go in to this. And like I say, September 24th, 1961, The People, Sunday, page 14. Now, the original ones were on page 2 and 3, so they worked their way down. And there you are, Hod Dibben with Mariella Novotny. There, Mariella Novotny, of course, slept with some very famous people. And there's this man is Andrei Gabor Tihama Bozomeni. He is a businessman, Hungarian businessman. He was also an art dealer, an antiques dealer. He also worked as an engineer on projects for in the engines, jet fighter engines. He was also involved in loads of other things, which of course you can see in part 3 of the Black Hand series. You read all about the man Bozomeni, who we'll talk about in here, and he's a very strange one. But he's worth investigating because he's got loads of these links to black market stuff to the disappearance of Patsy Morgan Dibben, apparently, according to this article. So here we go. Hod Dibben. There was something sinister and ominous about the dark stranger who came to my home with a business proposition. It was a proposition I could not entertain. And as he seized his briefcase and swept angrily out the door, he paused to place his hand heavily on my shoulder and say, "You can't win, Dibben. We'll get what we want in the end." I shuddered with foreboding. I could not escape the dread feeling that with this man, the hot breath of evil, which had pursued me for years, was on me again. The stranger was a Hungarian-born lawyer of international repute called Andrei Gabor Bozomeni. The business deal he sought was the control of the nightclub in Knightsbridge, Esmeralda's Barn. It was being run by Patsy, the grocer's daughter, whom I had taken into my home and brought up with the extravagant idea of turning her into the perfect woman. I could not entertain the idea of betraying her happiness by helping this outsider wrest control of her club. But there was something about his manner that made me uneasy, and that night an incident occurred which fanned my uneasiness into the blaze of fear. After some hours of fitful sleep, I awoke with a start at the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. I looked out thinking Patsy had forgotten her key. There was nobody there, but I heard a voice, almost like a whispering on the wind, saying, "To our servant in black will fall the responsibility of meting to you your deserts." Not deserts, deserts. I shouted back in panic, but there was no reply, and still no one to be seen. I shut the window and I sat in a chair helplessly. I knew that now the influence of the Black Brotherhood of Satan was reaching out to me again. Ever since I had dared to desert a black magic circle which I joined in wartime RAF officer in the Orkneys, that influence had pursued me. As a fully fledged member of that circle, I had surrendered my body and soul to the worship of evil. I revelled in the wildest orgies and rituals attended by men and women equally as depraved as I. Willingly, I rejected goodness, honesty, and purity. In their place, I embraced lust and obscenity. Only after 2 years of this depravity, when I attended a particularly loathsome and horrible ceremony, was I jerked back to my senses and convinced that I must quit this evil cult. I wanted to start life afresh and forget the foulness of my past. It was not easy, for I had been warned of the penalty for betrayal. Desertion. Vengeance would come to me by way of business disasters. The sudden death of my father, deprivation under his will, the death of a great friend in a car crash, and desertion by a person to whom you are devoted. As I sat by my bedside now, trembling at my experience with that strange mocking voice, I was forced to reflect that every part of that terrible forecast had come true except the last. Did this new sign of the Brotherhood's activity against me mean that the final part of the prophecy was to be fulfilled? A person whom you are devoted? Who else could that mean but Patsy? The possibility of her leaving me was dreadful thought. On her I had showered money and affection. I asked nothing of her in return except her loyalty, and on that I was convinced I could depend. The thought gave me courage, and I dismissed from my mind the voice at the window and the visit from the dark stranger which had preceded it. 3 nights after the first visit, Bozomeni called again. He stood at my front door and sneered, "The devil will be your judge." Then, without another word, he walked away. Now I was convinced that in some strange way this man was to be the instrument of final vengeance against me. My fears were soon confirmed. A few days later, Patsy suddenly packed her belongings at the flat and left me without explanation. After 10 years of her friendship, I was alone again. I had no idea where she had gone, but I felt sure Bozomeni had something to do with her disappearance. I pleaded with him to tell me where Patsy was. "She will not return, Hod Dibben," he sneered. I was so angry that for the first time since I left the black magic circle, I began to utter the vile oaths that I had been taught. For hours that night, I sat in my flat, staring at the spot where Bosameni had sat, and heaped upon him every death-dealing curse to which I could lay tongue. The days and weeks went by. There was still no sign of Patsy, except newspaper reports that she was on the continent because she was trying to escape from a man. My curses against Bosameni did not cease. Then one day I saw a paragraph about him in a newspaper. In a rage at the sight of his accursed name, I crumpled up the paper and placed it in the fireplace. Set fire to it with an oath. Next day I saw another item in the news about him. It announced that Andre Gabor Tiema Bosameni had suddenly dropped dead after a heart attack at the age of 49. I was seized with sudden remorse. Had my curses really had that effect? I was overcome by the thought that I might have cast a spell which had caused a man's death. Of all the mental and spiritual tortures which my embroilment with black magic had brought me, this was the worst of all. I went to church to pray for forgiveness. I begged for utmost penitence to atone for my evil. For hours I pleaded on bended knees. Then, at last, my chance came. A chance to cleanse myself once and for all. There was a knock at my door one day 4 months ago, and there stood a young Australian who looked at me imploringly and said, "Please help me, Mr. Dibben. If you don't, I shall die." I invited him in, and he poured out his story. A few weeks earlier, he had been invited to join a black magic circle. He agreed and took part in the first obscene introduction ceremony.
Secret power.
"Now I'm frightened," he said. He told me that I had been quoted as an example of how torture would pursue him if he dared to betray his black magic oath. "Is it true, Mr. Dibben?" he asked. "Is there secret power behind black magic?" I nodded, and I told him of the tragedy and disaster which had been my life for 15 long years. I came to a decision. I would help this young man to withdraw from black magic before it was too late. His initiation ceremony was to take place in a wood near Gloucester on June 24th, Midsummer's Day this year. But he had been told to meet some elders of the circle who would be waiting for him outside a hotel in Bristol a few days earlier. On that day, I drove down to Bristol and parked a car at a vantage point near the hotel. Soon, a large black limousine, chauffeur-driven, pulled up. It was followed by 5 other cars. The occupants were all smartly dressed and all wore black ties. I told my friend to get out of the car and to introduce himself. As he walked across the road towards the first car, the passenger shouted, "Get him, Paul!" And the chauffeur lunged towards the lad in an attempt to drag him into the car. I ran to the car and stood right in front of it. The driver angrily shouted to me to get out of the way. I refused and yelled, "Sons of Satan, I curse upon you!" The passengers in the car leaped out and came towards me. One, a short, stout man, brandished a stick and struck me across the shoulders. I grappled with him, but soon I was overpowered by numbers, and I was held against the wall. One of the men said menacingly,
"So far you have escaped, Hod Dibben, but we shall still get you, don't worry."
With the final rain of blows on me, they ran back to their cars and left. I was stunned and shaken, but I felt triumphant. I had proved to the Black Magic Circle's leaders that I was no longer afraid of them. A few days later, on the evening of June 24th, the Australian and I went to the woods just outside Gloucester, where he had been told the black magic ceremony was to take place. There was no sign of evil revelry. The woods were still.
Supernatural.
I drove back to London, satisfied that the tables had been turned. Now the black magic leaders were scared of me, frightened that I might expose them. They had called off their ceremony. Now I felt sure that they would trouble me no more. You may ask, if Satan's influence is as powerful as I have suggested, how is it that I have managed to escape it? The best way I can answer this is to say that, although I believe some power of evil exists as a counterpart to God, its powers are limited. It relies on living men as instruments to carry out its evil. This supernatural wickedness manifested itself in many ways to me. There were the sudden deaths, predicted deaths of those near and dear to me, which had no rational explanation. There were those mysterious visions and voices, and crude warnings, messages, all, I am sure, part of a campaign to frighten me into submission and force me to re-enlist into the ranks of evil. But they fell, because in the end, I overcame my fear. Through prayer and Christian devotion, I was able to bring the forces of goodness to my aid. Now I'm living in peace and contentment with my second wife, Mariella. I've experienced a rebirth. Life for me has started afresh after the trials of the last 15 years. But I know black magic still goes on in these isles. Reports still reach me of the degradation, depravity, and loathsomeness which envelops those who dabble in the black arts. Black magic is charged with fascination because it is an exciting form of escapism. It's different, but it also means the ultimate ruination, mentally and physically, of all those who dabble in it. And I've found to my cost, the vicious circle of black magic is easier to enter than to leave. I have told you my story in the hope that my words will be heeded as a warning by anybody who is tempted. To give way to that temptation is to endure a living death. There you go. We have done it. We have done it. We have gone through Hod Dibben's brilliant articles that were in the People newspaper, just flicking across to the first one. I cursed this man and then he fell dead, by Hod Dibben. And it says up here, now, at last, Hod Dibben is living in peace from his tormentors with his young wife, Mariella, left. But he is still haunted by the belief that his black magic curses killed this man. There he is. Andre Gabor Tihema Bozomeni, who's a very interesting figure in himself, and is a lawyer as well as an art stealer, as well as all the other things, as well as an engineer working for Gendrasic Corporation. A really interesting story. Like I say, part 3 of Hod Dibben of Black Hand series starts with Hod Dibben. He's a very interesting man. Well, wasn't that fun? Wasn't that an adventure? So you've heard all 4 parts of Hod Dibben's warnings about Satanism in the British Isles, and they all sound a little bit like bullshit, don't they? Yes, they do. That's because Hod Dibben was very good at doing that. Hod Dibben was a big bullshitter. And he also told a lot of truth in with it. And he seemed to just, loads of people loved him. He was just an iconic character, even back then. You know, he wasn't the silly fat guy that you have in your head. This guy was a very sensible. He knew what drove people, and he knew how to manipulate people really well, and he did lots of it. He knew how to get his way. Who lives acting out their perversion constantly 24/7? Hod Dibben did. Hod Dibben. He's just a case of pure, just bizarre humanity manifest. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I love humanity, and I love the weird ones, and I love learning about Hod Dibben. And that set of articles is really important because it was part of this seed in a satanic panic narrative back in the 60s, something that was utilized over and over again by intelligence agencies as well. And for some reason, Satanism attracts the elites. And that's why Hod Dibben was doing it. And he hung around with some of the most interesting people. Stephen Ward, Huntington Hartford, the original Jeffrey Epstein, as I know him. He was married to Mariella Novotny. Pygmalion Girl, the original Pygmalion Girl was Patsy Morgan Dibben. he was someone who really met everybody, and yet stayed in the shadows, even in the major events. I will cover this in Black Hand, but when he's smuggling Mariella out of America, helping to get Mariella out of America, he's organizing it. Seems like he's organizing it all with the help of FBI and CIA, and he's there in New York, and then he's there back in Britain. I think they arrive at Portsmouth or somewhere by boat, or Liverpool, but he's there waiting. He's actually, I think it's Portsmouth. I think he's waiting there with Mariella Novotny's mother, Constance Capes, who I talk about in the 4th of the Black Hand series, waiting for her at the dock for Mariella to arrive after she's been smuggled out of the country by CIA and FBI. And Hod Dibben is a crazy character. Lived to quite a ripe old age, and must have had a billion stories to tell. Lived life to the full. I mean, one of the gangsters in London said that about him in Douglas Thompson's book, Stephen Ward's Scapegoat. Said that basically Hod Dibben was the type of person, like many of the other flying aces, who could be dead tomorrow. You know, they had fought in World War II and death was right round the corner, so they lived to the fullest. And Hod Dibben truly did that. Whether you like him as a character, whether you think he was a nice character, that's something else, isn't it? But that's not something for us to necessarily work out when we're just going through the information and going through. And some of the most hilarious characters in history haven't been nice characters on the whole. But Hod Dibben, he's got a special place in my head and my heart for being at least original, extremely original. There was no one like Hod Dibben. Even his name, Hod Dibben, it sounds like a cartoon. I really hope you've enjoyed that read, for I felt it was really worth hearing and funny as well. It's just a bit silly, isn't it? So you can find my work on Fungi Monkey, johnnyvedmore.com, fungimonkey.com. You can find it on Unlimited Hangout. And I hope you search around. I mean, I got loads of interviews out there and stuff now, loads of podcasts, talk about everything under the sun. And so please keep enjoying. And for now, goodbye.
Young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets.